Hello and welcome back to ranking things that nobody ever asked to be ranked. Harry Potter has a lot of crazy spells, and today we're going to be taking a look at just how wild things get. Everything from the cosmic horror of vanishing things into oblivion, to creating supermassive black holes, to quantum entanglement, to the fact that 15-year-olds can just invent deadly spells. I'll be ranking things on a danger scale from 1, harmless wizarding trick, to 5, apocalyptic, world-ending, society-collapsing, return to hunter-gatherer wizards, you name it. I did this a while back with spells like Accio turning brooms into relativistic missiles, and that's probably one of the most popular videos on the channel, so I figured it's time to do a follow-up. And if you want more of this type of stuff, you can check out that video as well. But that's all of the setup, so like and comment and subscribe and whatever, and let's dive in. Harry Potter has a ton of ridiculously specific spells, but one thing that they don't have is a spell to find a healthcare provider. Which brings me to today's sponsor, ZocDoc. I recently went to the doctor for the first time in a long time, but to get there, I spent a week sorting through dozens of different websites and calling offices to find the right doctor. I can tell you that the process and the anxiety of your first visit is often so much worse than it needs to be. And I don't want any of you to put off taking care of your health just because of how frustrating the process of booking an appointment is. Finding a new doctor does not have to be as complicated as learning magic. With ZocDoc, you can search local in-network doctors, read real reviews from real patients, and actually see their availability. So you don't end up finding the perfect doctor only to discover they're not even taking new patients. No phone calls, no waiting on hold, no being told that the next opening is in 4 months. Appointments are often available in 24 to 72 hours, sometimes even the same day, and it's all completely free to use. It might not feel important, but getting started is often the hardest part. Head to ZocDoc.com/vault or click the link in the description to take a huge step towards prioritizing your health. That's ZocDoc.com/vault. ZocDoc.com/vault. Thanks again to ZocDoc for sponsoring today's video. Reparo. I'm starting off with Reparo because it is quite a simple spell, but let's just see what happens when we start to dive into things. It is, by all accounts, one of the simplest spells in the Harry Potter universe. It's a mending charm. It's just supposed to put things back together. But the way that it does that, and the things that it applies to, are not as consistent as you might first think. So if we look at the sort of track record of Reparo, we start off almost instantly as Harry gets on the train and Hermione reparos his glasses and things are off to a rip-roaring start in the Wizarding universe. But then if we fast forward just a couple years to the scene at the Whomping Willow and Harry's Nimbus 2000 gets destroyed, that is described as being beyond repair. Now, hold your comments for just a moment. I know that it's going to have to do with sort of the magical nature of some of these items, but just we'll get there, okay? Fast forward a couple more books. We have something like Draco repairing the vanishing cabinets. It's something that he can't just flick his wrist and cast Reparo. It doesn't work like that. There's a magical component that needs to be fixed. I understand that. He spends almost the entire year trying to figure this out. He gets help from Borgin and Burks. There's like a skill and expertise related to repairing and mending magical items. And then finally, the last maybe track record item on here to list would be repairing wands. So maybe the epitome of a magical item, you might say. Harry's wand is something that he can't repair until he does so with the Elder Wand. He tries earlier on, he has Hermione try to repair his spell. It kind of works a little bit, but then it doesn't ultimately fix it permanently. Now, to be fair, there is some consistency in what Reparo can and can't do. It seems to break apart the more complex or the more magical an item gets, and so when you jump forward to Deathly Hallows and Harry's able to use the Elder Wand to repair his wand, I guess that makes sense, but the limitations seem to vary pretty substantially based on who's repairing stuff, what they're using to repair it, what they're repairing in the first place, which begs the question, what is the limit? Would the Elder Wand, for instance, have been able to repair Harry's Nimbus 2000? I would argue Probably, but you're left kind of thinking that the things that Reparo is able to repair is not so much a magical system, and more so whatever's sort of convenient for the plot. And this is not necessarily specifically a plot hole video, but they're gonna be kind of sprinkled in here a little bit. Case in point, Hermione does try to repair Harry's wand, like I mentioned, and it does kind of work, which seems to imply that there's some sort of spectrum, a range of what Reparo can do. And I think this is especially the case if the Elder Wand is not a gift from some demon or god of death, and rather a man-made object. There seems to be a range of what Reparo can do based on the skill of the person that made the wand, the person casting the spell, etc., etc. And that's just sort of the inconsistencies that undermine the spell in the first place. I think it's also interesting to think about what it is actually doing, because you have sort of two paths here. Is it sort of reversing time in a way and putting something back the way it was? Or is it something related to the intent of the caster? Now, I would argue it's the latter, because we have an example in Half-Blood Prince where Harry takes two books, one of them being his contraband Snape book, and he swaps the covers and then uses Reparo to sort of put them back together. He cuts the cover off of one, puts the cover of a different one, swaps them, and he uses Reparo to put them back together. So it's not just sort of reversing time on an object, necessarily. It's putting things back the way that the caster intends them to, maybe so long as they line up with what they're supposed to look like? There is some level of contextual awareness that Reparo seems to have. But I don't know if you can will the magic past some range, plus and minus, of what the thing is supposed to be. For instance, if I took a pencil and cast Reparo on it, intending to turn it back into a log, that seems to obviously not be the purpose of Reparo, but what if that's my intent? If I cast it on a quill, does it turn back into a bird, or do we have to use other spells to conjure things and make sentience out of nothing? We really just don't know what the rules are. Does it scale with the wand, with the wizard, with the intent, with the object itself, all of the above? Who knows? The other piece of this is we only ever see details around mending things with Reparo. It's only ever Reparo. There's a hint of a more complex system of mending magical items through Draco's fixing of the vanishing cabinets, but he has this convo at Borgin and Burke's. There's the thing that I'm keying in on here, I guess, is that there's not really like artificing in Harry Potter. There's not runes. There's not like a physical manifestation of the magic in any way. It's not like Skyrim where you're imbuing something with a soul, I guess, unless you talk about a Horcrux. I don't know. There's only a sort of vague enchanting aspect that happens. And so Draco goes and gets advice, and in the movies, he casts a spell that's called, I think it's Harmonia Nectare Passus. That's only in the movies. I don't know if that's a, whatever, call it canon if you want, but there's a different spell that seems related specifically to the magic, and maybe he's just re-enchanting the thing with the original spell that was used. It's obviously not clear, but it does make me wonder, what is he doing for a year? Is he just pacing back and forth, casting Reparo over and over and over, and just not doing anything? Again, I don't know. It's a moment where you kind of wish there was some harder magic or a deeper sense of world building around the magic itself in Harry Potter, where it's like there's just nothing supporting the magic. And maybe that's because magic is just supporting a different story, but for being this sort of de facto wizarding childhood book, there's just not a lot of world building that goes on with the actual magic part of things. It's just, can Harry cast it or not? But set all of that aside for a moment, I wanted to look at one other little wrinkle in this, which is the Wonder Book. Now, the Wonder Book is a PDF of like a bunch of random details about spells, some of which are never cast in the series aside from being mentioned in this book. But there's a little bit of writing that flipped this sort of upside down. I don't know how canon this is, but I just think it's interesting to bring in. I'm sure J.K. Rowling is involved in this. How exactly, I don't remember. But there's this little section that says Reparo must never be used on humans or animals. Extreme scarring may result from attempts to heal wounds with this spell. Keyword here, may? Extreme scarring may result? I mean, I think it raises a couple of pretty unanswerable questions, which, first of all, why can't you use it on a living being? It seems like, again, we have a range, a spectrum of things that maybe it might work to heal humans. And I don't know if that's just like physically putting things back together, or does it go deeper than that? Would the Elder Wand, for instance, have been able to use Reparo to put people back together? Even if you take a sort of tangential view from that, wands are kind of viewed as living versions of magical items, and like they have personalities, and there seems to be some level of aliveness in wands, or so it seems, and Reparo works, at least in that one instance, on Harry's wand. So again, where is the limit? Where I sort of arrived with this is that if the Elder Wand is man-made, and the existing guardrails for Reparo seem to be more like guidelines than actual rules, and if it's the case that my imagination is the only limitation, this is basically just a reverse entropy spell that could repair the slow decay of the universe. I mean, I kid, obviously, but I don't know the limits, and I don't think J.K. Rowling knows the limits either. So I'm coming out strong with a 4 out of 5 because, with a proper set of limitations, this would probably be a 1, but it's a story that just can't help but hedge the entire magical system with a whole bunch of what-ifs. At the very least, there's no reason to buy anything new in this world, not that their economy makes any sense to begin with, but at the most, maybe you can just patch up a dying star with it. Evanesco. Evanesco is perhaps one of the least talked about spells in the entire series, and at the same time, may have one of the most extreme set of consequences that we see, period. You might be asking yourself, what even is Evanesco? I don't even know if I'm saying it correctly. Evanesco is the vanishing spell. It's a standard 5th year owl spell that is on their testing curriculum. McGonagall teaches it to all of them. We have a pretty extended example of Harry practicing it in Order of the Phoenix, and he's not, admittedly, very good at it. He says she was quite right. Harry found the vanishing spells horribly difficult. By the end of a double period, neither he nor Ron had managed to vanish the snails on which they were practicing, though Ron said hopefully that he thought his looked a little paler. Hermione, on the other hand, had successfully banished her snail in the 3rd attempt, earning her a 10-point bonus for Gryffindor from Professor McGonagall. Now, at the time, in Book 5, you might not have found that consequential or room to pause at all. You might not have even thought about what happens to the thing when it gets vanished, but lucky for you, McGonagall goes into a little bit of detail a couple years later. She is talking to the Ravenclaw door, which asks her in a sort of riddly way, where do vanished objects go? And she responds by saying, into non-being, which is to say, everything. To which the door says, nicely phrased, implying that she's correct. On the off chance that this is some sort of like wizard joke that none of us get, I guess that the rest of this whole section is moot, but I don't think that's the case. I think this is a real explanation of what Evanesco does. And I thought about this line quite a bit, mainly because I was trying to decide how distinct this was from every other type of spell we see in the world. But vanished objects don't go into a storage container. They're not we don't have a Storage War episode of people just that's where all the vanished objects go and that's where you can go find them. They get disappeared. They don't get converted into energy. They just, disperse across the local atmosphere, the universe, like a magical plane of existence. This isn't so much a vanishing spell as it is a delete from existence spell. So I think the vanishing part is a little bit of a misnomer. And I think if this were somehow limited to inanimate objects in the same way that maybe Reparo's only works on physical objects and not living beings, that might make it a little bit better, but it's explicitly not. I mean, the first time we literally see it is them trying to vanish snails. So I will give them the fact that the difficulty seems to scale because, inanimate objects seem to be easier than living things. But that scaling, I think, honestly makes it a little bit worse, at least based on how McGonagall describes it. Because she says, as I was saying, the vanishing spell becomes more difficult with the complexity of the animal to be vanished. The snail, as an invertebrate, does not present much of a challenge. The mouse, as a mammal, offers a much greater one. Now, she's saying this to a bunch of fifth-year students, which is to say, I don't think it's implying that a mouse is really off the table. She doesn't say a snail is hard and a mouse is impossible. She says a snail's easy and a mouse is a little bit harder. She doesn't really say anything's impossible. And so we have at least 2 points here. You've got a mouse and you've got a snail. I don't know if the line between these is linear up to a human, or if this is some sort of exponential curve, and vanishing a human is so difficult that it is essentially impossible. It's some sort of asymptotic relationship. And I mean, honestly, you could very easily take it to the extreme and say, like, you could vanish the Earth, or I don't know, even if you started smaller and set a building. Again, I don't know if this is a situation where it's like you need to intimately understand the thing that you're vanishing in order to do that. And so therefore, something larger and larger just gets harder and harder to the point of it being impossible. Who knows? But if you sort of plotted like snail, mouse, dog, chimpanzee, human, like how is the scaling and difficulty happening here? Is it just linear? Do you just, like, what can Dumbledore vanish out of existence? I mean, it leads me very directly into what are the consequences of being vanished. McGonagall is implying that things just sort of dissipate into non-being. Can things be brought back? Like, what happens to your organs or like your memories? Like, I guess your soul in the Harry Potter world. Is it deadly? We don't know. What happened to the snails that got vanished? I mean, it kind of is brought up in the same breath as the conjuration spell, because she says that the conjuration spell is easier to cast than vanishing things, but I'm not really sure that that's like the answer, because I think conjuring things is sort of a different topic entirely in Harry Potter. We see, for instance, Dumbledore conjuring like food for feasts, but he's bringing things that already exist from like the basement up to the main floor. So it's not like he's pulling objects out of non-existence. And on the topic of pulling things out of non-existence, we haven't really talked about what even it means for McGonagall to say things go into non-being. Like, what is non-being? Is it a different universe? Is it like at a material level that we're all made of stardust, except instead of stardust, we're all made of little bits of Harry? Like, is this more of a metaphysical thing? Do you turn into magic? Is it like a midichlorian thing? It's all just a lot to sort of drop on everyone in a single line at the very end of the series with no additional explanation. So I guess instead of trying to find a real answer here, I thought I would just launch into a couple other random hypotheticals. For instance, what happens if you vanished a Horcrux? Now, a Horcrux is an object. It's a locket or a cup or whatever. Admittedly, a pretty complex one in the grand scheme of things. It's essentially a soul, so it's on par, I think, maybe slightly below a human in terms of difficulty to vanish. What if you vanished one of them? I mean, it's clearly not the sort of standard way of destroying a Horcrux, but we don't really know what happens when you vanish it. Does that count as destruction? Or have you just created a Horcrux that's permanent and can't be destroyed and is sort of dispersed across the universe? I mean, potentially, instead of this being a sort of defensive stop Voldemort thing, Voldemort just missed out on, he could have been immortal by just vanishing one of his Horcruxes. I mean, honestly, I'm kind of wondering why he didn't just do that, because that would have solved everything. And I know, whatever, he wanted them to be found, or whatever, he's got a death wish, I don't know. Alternatively, what if you vanished Voldemort himself, well, he had Horcruxes. What happens then? A normal person might get vanished and just sort of disappear from existence, but what about someone that has Horcruxes? Would he be able to come back and sort of escape the void of nothingness that McGonagall sends him to? I mean, obviously, Horcruxes are extremely magical items and super complex, and it's probably impossible to vanish one. But that's never really explicitly said, and the bar for getting rid of a Horcrux is destroying it. So I don't exactly know that vanishing it wouldn't work were you able to do that. Honestly, the last sort of hypothetical here is that I haven't really talked about the physical side of things here. Like, what happens when you vanish something right in front of you? Do you create a sort of vacuum in front of you? Could you vanish a small pocket of air right in front of you and create this vacuum of space? It's kind of the same as apparating, in that I think that logic is this cavitation of this vacuum being created. And if you vanished a space of air big enough instantaneously, I think that collapsing air around it would create quite a disruption. So, I think you could use this spell offensively without having to explicitly vanish a human being. You could create sort of micro sonic booms right next to somebody. I think that would have a pretty devastating effect at close range. Could you also vanish the air around someone's head, like Avatar: The Last Airbender style? It's pretty grim, but they do it in a children's cartoon, so I don't know why Harry couldn't do it. I mean, obviously, basically, no one in this universe is super creative with their magic to begin with, so it's not like we're ever going to see any of that, but I thought I would just raise them as ideas and move on from there. This spell basically just leaves a lot up to imagination, and because I have a big imagination, I'm going to give Evanesco a 5 out of 5. I'm curious what you all think about a spell that's barely mentioned but seems to just rip apart this fabric of space-time on a whim. But for now, 5 out of 5, leaving it and moving on to the next one. Aguamenti and Incendio. Now, speaking of the laws of physics in the Harry Potter world, I thought I would bring up a couple spells that really dive a little bit deeper on what's going on here. We've got Aguamenti, which is basically point your wand at something and water comes out from nothing, and we've got Incendio, point your wand at something and fire comes out from nothing. These are basically treated as utility spells in the universe. It's like having a garden box and a lighter with you at all times, but, a little bit more extreme than that. Nobody, obviously, ever stops to think about what's actually happening because it's magic, and we only do that here on this channel. But let's start with Aguamenti. We have the obvious funny examples like Harry and Dumbledore in the cave, where he can't get Dumbledore to drink anything because the water just falls through the cup. But what if he just pointed the spell and cast it into Dumbledore's mouth? There's a little animated short somewhere that I keep seeing that gets the point across visually and maybe more effectively than talking about it. But there's probably some dark magic stopping that from happening, but you'd think Harry would at least try to, instead of pointing it here, just pointing it directly at Dumbledore's mouth. Would have solved a lot of problems a lot sooner. But it does beg the question, where is the water coming from? Does it A, pull the water from somewhere else, either in the universe or the atmosphere, or is it is it a summoning spell, or B, is it conjuring the water from nothing? Either way, there's a host of issues to talk about, probably least of which is the fact that wizards basically could solve global humanitarian crises with crises. Either way, they could solve all of them with just a little flick and swish and flick. Man, this sentence was a disaster, but they choose not to. Now, if I had to wager based on how the magic works in Harry Potter, I'm guessing it's just it probably gets created from nothing, and we don't ever have to think about it. But if I were to apply some sort of physical magic to it, I would guess that you could explain this by saying that it is pulling water from the surroundings. But if that's the case, I'm not exactly sure, if you're pulling it out of the air, how much water is in the air to begin with. I'd have to imagine that, if you left your wand on for a couple minutes, you just basically desiccate the air around you, and you turn it into a desert almost immediately. I don't know. I think there's some interesting consequences to the physical side of magic that obviously is not explored in this series, but interesting to think about nonetheless. Alternatively, maybe it senses an underground reservoir, and that means that it just doesn't work in certain places. If you were in the desert, that maybe means that you're just not able to cast certain spells. And maybe you have a radius that improves based on how good you are at magic, and it still leaves you in situations where certain magic just isn't accessible to you because of the physical limitations. But if we push past Aguamenti and instead turn to the sort of opposite side of the spectrum, Incendio, we have a sort of escalation of the conversation. So the fire is not a physical object per se, it's more of a chemical process, right? So we're not actually making something anymore, we're conjuring a sort of chemical reaction, we're conjuring energy, basically. Unless Incendio is sort of working like a flamethrower and conjuring a stream of fuel and a spark over top of it at the same time. But I don't think this is Harry Potter going back to Nam, and that's how this is working. I think that it's conjuring just straight energy in a way, and not at a microscopic large hadron collider scale. It's a torrent of flame shooting out of his wand. Or maybe it's a fireball, I guess. But still, it's fire. So you've got a spell that creates water out of nothing and matter out of nothing, and you've got examples of Incendio creating sort of energy out of nothing. You've immediately solved basically every problem that humanity has ever faced, and that's maybe beside the point, but it does have me wondering, like, what other types of energy manipulation are possible? I'm essentially waiting for Harry Potter Oppenheimer or like nuclear energy manipulation in this world, but obviously no one in Britain or in Harry Potter's Britain is industrious enough to invent something like that, so we'll never know. But once again, I'm just asking HBO to do something interesting in the future with this. Like, just any sort of gritty Harry Potter spin-off would be great. I don't know, Peaky Blinders, but Harry Potter. All in, I think I have to give this bucket of spells a 5 out of 5, because if there's a risk, even ever so small, of a thermonuclear war being created by the wands of 15-year-olds, I think that deserves a 5 out of 5. So we're sticking it there. Pocket dimensions. This is a section that asks, what if it's not a spell that's the most broken magic in this world? What if it's Hermione's purse? If you recall back in Deathly Hallows, this is what Hermione is using to sort of move things around and hide them in her ever-expanding purse. She puts a portrait in the purse. There's a never-ending list of things that can happen with this, but we actually see this spell being used, I think, a few times, not just with Hermione's purse. I don't think it's even just limited to her purse. I think it's also, for instance, the tent that they stay in, the the Goblet of Fire at the Quidditch World Cup. All of these things are bigger on the inside than they appear from the outside. And the tents, for instance, are like commercially available camping gear for them. At the very least, standard operating procedure to do this kind of thing, to make space at large wizarding events. So it's a very commonly used spell. The Weasley's car is enchanted to be bigger on the inside. Perhaps the Room of Requirements also has this spell layered in amongst many other things. Point being, it's not just for bags that you put things in, it's also for just spaces in general. Now, I will grant that it's at least canon that the Ministry restricts this charm pretty heavily, the use of it, but Hermione casts it herself, and I don't think there's anyone sort of monitoring that restriction, so I don't know how much is really even being accomplished. I would assume that she read about it in a book somewhere, and she calls it tricky, but that doesn't stop her from doing it. There's no real sense of what tricky even means in this world. Is it just concentrating harder, or is there something else that's required to make it work? It is, at the end of the day, probably just a flick of your wrist and a word that they say. So let's get to a few of the problems that I think are caused by this spell. The first one I think is something related to mass. Hermione's bag contains books and a tent and portraits and like all this supplies and stuff in there, but she carries it like it's a purse. It doesn't take on the extra weight of what she places inside of it. At least it doesn't appear to, unless she's actually swole out of her mind and we just don't see that. But the question is, where does all of that mass go? I think there's kind of like two possible options, and it's either that somehow the mass is suppressed when they're inside of the bag, or gravity doesn't work or something, or that the contents actually don't even exist in that bag, and this is somehow related to like the Evanesco spell, and they're just vanished into nothingness until someone takes it out of the bag. That maybe kind of makes sense for her purse, but that gets real weird when you talk about them going into a tent that has the same magic being applied to it. I mean, again, we are kind of in the same territory as Evanesco. Like, if the bag was a little bit bigger and you could fit a person into it, what happens if a person goes into it? Do they fall into a bottomless pit, or are they just sort of in a big room that they can come out of whenever they want? We start with Hermione putting a portrait in here, but it's just a little hop, skip, and a leap to go to putting a human being in here and finding out what happens. I mean, related, I guess, is if the weight is not an issue, what else could you put inside the bag? If we look to Odysseus, for instance, pop culture reference, what happens? Like, could you use it like a Trojan horse? Like, make a bag big enough that people could fit in and sneak a whole army across enemy lines and then all of a sudden they just pop out of the bag. It does kind of raise the question of what is inside the bag. Is there air inside there for them to breathe? Is everyone sort of just like in stasis in there? Like what is going on inside of the bag? I mean, of course, I'm being hyperbolic with all of this, but it has me wondering, how does Hermione find things within the bag? Because even if you grouped everything together, some things are bigger than others, and like, how does she reach far enough to find the things in there in the first place? Maybe it's all being sort of sorted like a video game inventory. This honestly, as I was writing this, was like, I was thinking about Dungeon Crawler Carl and like his inventory system that just is a thing that just manages everything for him. Maybe that's how it works. All in, I think I have to give this one a 4 out of 5. There's plenty of ridiculous examples I could think of and continue this segment on, but I think the fact that it just sort of undermines the idea of physical space is enough to give it a 4 out of 5. Sectum Sempra. We are now onto the only item on this list that seems to have been invented by a teenager in his spare time, and fueled by pure teenage angst. Okay, I think we all know how this spell is used and where it comes about, but if you need a primer, this is the spell that Harry essentially reads in the margins of his Half-Blood Prince textbook written by Snape. And, it's annotated with information like 4 enemies, and he just decides, Draco's an enemy, I'll just use this random spell on him, and hopefully the results are what I hope for. That was a great sentence. I do wonder if this is an instance where you're given a glimpse inside of the wizarding world, where, like, up until this point, Harry has not known spells, aside from Unforgivables, to have these sort of terrible effects. I'm like racking my brain for other examples of this, but this is like an instance where maybe all the magic that he's interacted with before has had to have been very intentional, and this time all he really has to do is say the words and think bad thoughts towards Draco, and he basically almost kills him. So again, not a plot hole video, but we are like one coincidence away from Harry being a murderer, because this only works out because Snape happens to be walking past, who is the only person that knows how to fix the damage done by Sectum Sempra by having this very specific counter healing curse that he is able to use on Draco, which in itself I think is part of the issue with this spell, because it just cracks the door open for what's possible when apparently anyone can invent magic. And I'll add a little caveat on there that sure, Snape is probably an incredibly accomplished wizard, and so that the bar is probably pretty high for who can invent things like this, but he does it. So clearly it's possible, and clearly he can't be the only young wizard capable of inventing magic. And so thankfully he's around to cast the one healing curse that exists for this spell, because he apparently is the one that invented that as well. But it opens up the scenario where like he could have just unleashed this deadly spell upon the world that doesn't have a known fix. And on top of that, there's not really a way for anyone to stumble upon the counter curse just by chance, because you're not just like trolling through old textbooks looking for random spells that people have invented. You just wouldn't have an answer for it, and the time that you would need it would be like in the moment. You wouldn't have the chance to sort of research how to counter Sectum Sempra. So, Snape aside, it gets into kind of a population question of the wizarding world, because if this is as easy as it seems to create a spell, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's at least plausible for people to do this. If that's plausible, and you have a population of the wizarding world the size that it is, even if it's only 20,000 people, this should be more common. On one hand, you might think that if it was this easy, that everyone would have their own unique deadly spells at their wand tips ready to go, especially angsty, depressed teenagers that are looking for a way to strike back their enemies. That seems like it would be ripe to happen all the time if this were the case. On the other hand, you could maybe suppose that the population is pretty small in the wizarding world, and so this is an instance of like a big fish in a small pond scenario. It's basically that Snape is Usain Bolt and he's at a D5 school, and so he's the only one that's capable of doing this, which Even as the words are coming out of my mouth, I know that's not possible, because you have, at the very least, people like Voldemort or Dumbledore, and plenty of other accomplished witches and wizards. So he is maybe on the worst case scenario spectrum of like people that decide to invent magic, but he's certainly not the only one that would want to get even with his enemies. Now, speaking of that counter curse, in the movies, I think he says like Vulnera Sanctura or something like that. There's no words put to it in the books, so it's an invention for the movies that, I don't know, I'm sure is canon enough. It's not like a word that he does, it's more like a spell, which I know this is like, we're talking about the movie itself here, but the book also describes what he does as almost like a song, which in my mind kind of opens the world for a really expanded part of the Harry Potter magical universe, which extends beyond just using Latin words. It's, I think, the only example of something like this that I could think of. You can let me know in the comments if there's other similar ways of performing magic, but, you know, I think a similar vein would be like the Vila, you know, using their charm on people, and that's kind of maybe analogous or adjacent at least. But it's strange, I think, that this is like the only time that a spell is described this way, and Snape has sort of invented not only his own killing spell, but also a unique method of casting the counter spell, and we don't ever see anything like this again. You know, this started out as like, how do I rank Sectum Sempra? But what it has kind of turned into as I was writing about this was like, more than anything, I just wish there was more world building on how magic and spells are created, like storytelling about where it comes from. Why do they settle on those Latin words and not others? Why is it Latin to begin with? Because, well, it's not always Latin. I think Avada Kedavra is some like North African word, maybe? I don't know. But that's all J.K. Rowling's invention. So I just wish there was more to flesh out this stuff. And at the same time, it just leaves me to flesh it out for you all. So hopefully you're enjoying it. All in, I think this is kind of an interesting one because it leads to a potential arms race in terms of people creating their own spells. And we have no way of judging how difficult it actually is to create a spell. But in this world where it's possible, I think it would escalate in a way that would be hard to control if everyone is capable of doing this without any oversight. So as a stand-in for people creating their own magic, I'm going to give Sectum Sempra a 4 out of 5 because it does just introduce the risk of what happens if you crowdfund magic. It's not crowdfunding, but like open source magic. That's maybe a better word for it. Sectum Sempra as a stand-in for open source magic and what's possible when you let anyone do anything. 4 out of 5. Protean Charm. The Protean Charm is basically, I think, what you get when you cross Harry Potter with science fiction, and Hermione makes this discovery or makes this like leap to using this spell in a way that I think would have much broader consequences and maybe might have other uses in the book. So if you're sitting there saying, what is the Protean Charm? I don't blame you because it's something that kind of flies by, and you might know what it is by reference, but not by name. So in the books, the charm that Hermione uses on the coins for Dumbledore's army. This allows Harry to make changes to meeting times and etc., and it reflects on everyone else's coin. They are all sort of inextricably linked to Harry's original so that he can communicate with everyone secretly. Amongst other things, I think the numbers change. I think like the ridges around the edge of the coin maybe change if I remember right, and the coins also oh my gosh, we had wildfires up in the Midwest and my throat has not been the same since those fires. Man, the smoke I think did some lasting damage. It's really quite annoying, honestly. Anyway, the coins also get hot. I think that was the other part that I forgot to say. I also think that this is maybe not the first instance of this charm being used. There's speculation on different forums that this is also the way that the Dark Mark works for Voldemort, and it's some sort of original that maybe he has that we never see tattooed on his body. I don't know, but he is able to basically communicate out through all of his followers at the same time. because that's kind of the reaction we see from people when the dark mark activates on them. But I think the thing that's interesting here to think about is not just that there's like information being transmitted between duplicates here, there's also some type of energy happening, which had me thinking that if I approach this from like a physics angle, the closest I would get is some sort of quantum entanglement thing. And we're getting nerdy in a video about Harry Potter, so forgive me. If you don't forgive me, I think you're maybe in the wrong place. My understanding is quantum entanglement is basically two particles that are inextricably linked, and the change in one results in the change in the other. And normally we're talking on a scale of like neutrons or something, I don't know, quarks. They're too small to even matter in a practical application. Unless we have quantum computers in the future, I don't know. Anyway, it's too small to matter. But in Harry Potter, we're talking about things at the scale of coins and dark marks and tattoos and stuff. So the scale is a much more reasonable and practical size. So in reality, it's not the sort of temperamental, hard to measure quantum entanglement that we have nowadays. It's something that's completely controllable. I think in real physics, you probably can't control what is being... I'm not an expert here, clearly. Anyway, this is like the extreme version of what could possibly happen with quantum entanglement in the future in a way that we can control. This is maybe a stretch, but just stick with me, okay? I think what's interesting about this is, again, not that it's just information that's transmitting here, there's like energy that's happening and transmitting between copies in some way. So close your eyes for a moment and imagine with me, form your mind palace, you've got a coin in your pocket and you've got a duplicate over there. What happens if you drop your original coin in a furnace? What happens to the other coin? Does it heat up in the same way that your coin heats up? Take it a step further and imagine that actually happened in Order of the Phoenix and everybody just has pocket furnaces with them that Harry just has complete control over. The sort of saboteur side of things. So again, I'm going to mention Harry Potter, Star Wars, and/or spin-off for like the 15th time in this channel. But like the potential for use cases in a sort of like spy saboteur type of context are limitless. But it also has me wondering like what happens in the extreme case of altering the original. Like if you destroy the original, does it destroy the copies? And then that leads me to another conclusion of like, does the copy in the duplicate have to be an exact replica of the original? Because it may be the case with the coins that they're duplicates, but the tattoos, if that holds true, the dark mark on the Death Eater's arms are tattoos. They're like by nature not exact copies of the original, and yet they still function with the protean charm. So if you took that to the extreme, what is the limit to what you can link together with the protean charm? Do they just have to be in a similar typology, or do they have to be exactly alike? Could Fred and George have protean charms of each other cast on themselves? If George was Fred's protean twin, maybe would he function as like an inadvertent Horcrux of... Maybe Fred would still be alive today, and if they had just thought about some weird dark magic ways of surviving. But that's probably the most insane Harry Potter theory I've ever come up with in my life, that Fred could have been George's Horcrux twin with a protean charm. I don't think that one's gonna fly. So the last little bit of this, I guess, is a speculation piece for me, which is we have a thing called taboos in the Harry Potter world, which are words that seem to instantly ripple throughout the universe and have some indication that they're being used. And I'm wondering out loud, as a sort of how do I unify the magic system together, is if taboos are a sort of offshoot of the protean charm, and that somehow they're linked together in a way that allows the original, or the person that casts the spell on monitoring the taboo word, to be alerted to the use of the taboo word out in the field. I don't know. I think out of all of them, I was trying really hard to stretch this one, and while it's kind of crazy, I don't think the application is easy enough to extend it to some sort of apocalypse world-ending scenario. So I think I'm gonna stick the protean charm with a 3 out of 5. It's a little bit kind of in the middle and hard to apply. I think, like, theoretically, if there's sort of mass and energy being transferred between two objects, it probably raises it up to a 4 out of 5, but I'll keep it at a 3 out of 5 and we'll move on to the next section. Animagus. This is going to be ripe for people telling me that I'm pronouncing this wrong, but I'm going to say Animagus. I'm pretty sure that's the correct way to say this, but anyway, this is potentially one of the most highly regulated parts of the magic within the wizarding world, and yet it is so incredibly underregulated that we've got a list that has like 7 names on it, and we know like 4 other people that can do it that aren't even on that list. Let's start at the beginning, right? This is supposed to be an incredibly difficult spell to cast, and if you look at the instructions to cast it, it is nigh impossible to do this, but we don't ever see anyone have to go through with actually becoming an animagus, so you never have to sort of explain how ridiculous it is, because there are steps in there about like holding something in your mouth for a month straight, or like repeating a certain spell for like 12 hours straight, and then happening to get struck by lightning in a certain spot or something. There's crazy rules about how this could possibly even happen in the first place. But regardless, there is a registry for it, and I think there are 7 registered animagi on it in this century, according to I think what Hermione says. Meanwhile, we have James, Sirius, and Pettigrew, who figured it out as teenagers, completely unsupervised, based on like what they found in the school just to keep their werewolf friend company. So at a bare minimum, we've got 7 plus 3 who did it like as a token of their friendship. And I have a feeling, just based on pure statistics, that number is actually quite a bit higher. I don't know, maybe there's like some biological statisticians out there in the comments that could give me some sort of model of doing it, but if we've got really a registered 7 out of, I don't know, 20,000 witches and wizards in the UK, at least 3 on the page
That's
that
out
we
of the random sampling
know
or
that's
not. I don't
on
know,
that
1 or
list.
2 out of every
Characters
100,
now, which
right?
would make 20,000 have, I don't know, 200 to 400 animaguses, animagi wandering around, right? I just like the statistics don't make any sense. And to support that, let's take a look at what you actually get, what you receive if you become a Harry Potter Animorph. First and foremost, you get a sort of permanent, at-will, instant, untraceable disguise that you can just transform at will. No one will ever figure it out, because the second you get away, you're just another dog on the street. If you have any sort of nefarious goals or just want to be unsupervised, this is a no-brainer for you. Second, you get like semi-immunity from certain magical effects like Dementors. It's not immunity per se, but you at the very least fly under the radar for things that would normally affect humans, apparently. I mean, that's basically the entire way that Sirius survives in Azkaban, right? And on that point, you basically get to bypass all security screens. You know, I'm thinking about like our real world security TSA lines and stuff, but like nobody stops a dog going through security. It's just a dog. Honestly, this is perfectly described by both how Sirius Black survives in Azkaban and how Peter Pettigrew is able to survive and evade capture and death for like 12 years as a rat. It honestly makes me wonder how many people have just like animagied into a fish and just never come out of the ocean. You explicitly cannot decide what you become, what animal you turn into, but we only have a few examples and they're all some sort of land-dwelling creature. But that can't always be the case, right? Is there a limit to what you can turn into as an animagus? I mean, there has to be something that's like aligning with your inner personality or something, I'm sure. But like, someone must have the personality traits that align with a humpback whale. And then what? Do they transform on land? And just good luck the first time figuring it out? I mean, certainly some people have the characteristics of a dolphin, like, or an otter, or just a fish. Like somebody aligns with a shark, like Victor Crumb, right? There are certainly people that could have just transformed, flopped into the ocean, and just never come out. And none of you in the comments know what the answer is to this, so I don't want to hear it. But I don't know, maybe you tell me what animagus you would turn into and why. But I have a feeling there's a bunch of witches and wizards that are just swimming around in the ocean because they don't want to deal with any of this stuff that happens when Harry Potter's in town. Ultimately, I'm going to give this a 3 out of 5 almost purely because the process to become an animagi is absolutely absurd. But that said, if you're basically able to turn into this untraceable permanent shapeshifter, and it's only regulated by a self-selected sign-up sheet that tracks who is an animagus, you can just ignore it if you want. So like the liability aspect here, I think, is quite high. And so I'm going to give this a 3 out of 5. I think this would realistically probably start to erode societal trust in, who's doing what in their spare time. But I think 3 out of 5 is a reasonable place to put amino, animato, animagid, animagus, whatever the word is. 3 out of 5. The pensive. The pensive / the memory magic that happens around it, I think, is a really interesting thing. And I think I can forewarn that like the ranking here is not going to be that high because it's not going to blow the world up, but I do think it would have some actual effect on the sort of justice system within Harry Potter. So I think it's worth talking about, because what it appears to be is that I know the pensive is just a way to view the memories, but outside of the pensive, there appears to be a way to just sort of pull memories out of your head if you're a witch or wizard, or I guess out of just about any orifice you want. Snape cries a memory out. Dumbledore pulls it directly out of his skull. I'm sure there are other ways. Anyway, I think, can act as this sort of objective record of what happens, and the person viewing the memory can just kind of walk around the scene. I know that there's a comment coming that, like, we've already seen memories altered in that Slughorn gives Dumbledore an altered memory that's not perfect regarding telling Tom Riddle about Horcruxes, yada yada. But I think that the change Slughorn makes in that memory is a pretty minor one. He like omits certain things, cuts the memory short at certain times. I don't think it's like he didn't change the setting, and he didn't change the fact that he talked to Tom Riddle in the first place. So I think there's probably a limit to how much you can alter your own memory here. For instance, I think like if you took Sirius Black as an example, the difference between him being a mass murderer and the truth are pretty far apart. So the idea that like maybe someone wouldn't trust Sirius Black's memory because they thought he altered it to show that he isn't the killer in this hypothetical scenario, I think that would be like too much of an alteration to make to the memory. I think there'd be a limit here, and it could function as a way of getting to the bottom of things. And I mean, to that point, memories are really only seen being extracted by the person that has the memory. So I think you would have to rely on the person to produce the memory for you, but that's not to say it's impossible for the judge and jury to extract a memory from someone forcefully, and in which case maybe Sirius wouldn't have time, or any criminal in this scenario wouldn't have time to alter the memory before it was pulled up on the big screen. They're probably like projecting the pensive for everybody to see in the courtroom, but like you wouldn't have time to make an alteration that would be at the very least something that would be convincing, right? Let alone clear you of any wrongdoing. And I mean, this is all getting dangerously close to just being what happens if Harry Potter took place in the world of Inception. But I do wonder if there's a way to sort of understand if the memory is unaltered by the person supplying it, or potentially you just have found a way to get perfect evidence of something happening. Maybe you just have to have a few multiple memories to line up certain events, and imagine you mix both the memories together in the pensive, and then you can like a weird version of a magic eye puzzle. You can like see where the memories overlap and where something has changed. I don't know. I'm making things up right now, but you get the point, I think. All of this is kind of a ridiculous hypothetical, but we don't really ever see the mechanics of how a memory is altered. We're given a sort of glimpse of this in the way that it's told to us that Veritaserum isn't perfect, and people have ways of navigating being administered the truth potion. And so presumably it works the same way with memories, I would guess. But this seems like more of an instance of like, don't question the lore here. That's just how it works, than, any actual hard rules to begin with. And I mean, it's kind of a bit of an offshoot of a previous question that I asked, but like Dumbledore talks about using the pensive as a way to clear his mind. And it's not clear if he means like he's literally removing the memory from his memory, or if it's like just cataloging it for him, or if it's somewhere in the middle. Maybe it's like he's got the Spark Notes that's still in his head, but needs to go watch the whole thing for all the details. Maybe it's just a way to store the memory perfectly, and you could always recall it as best as your ability would allow, but going to watch it in the pensive would be like a solidified version of the memory that you could always refer back to as truth. Maybe that's the most realistic answer here. I don't know. The jury is out on that one, so you can tell me. I think that in the same way that unbreakable vows might be the single one sure answer to fixing the justice system within Harry Potter, I think the pensive might be another step in that direction if they wanted to fix it. Ultimately, I think there's a lot of unknowns, and this isn't breaking anything fundamental to the story, so again, I can't give it that high of a score. I'm going to give it, I think, a 2 out of 5 for the pensive / memory magic section of this video. I think the implications could be good, but more in like a, I don't know, social justice side of things than like a light the whole planet on fire or, you know, vanish something into nothingness. Yeah, so we'll stick with a 2 out of 5. Defense against the Dark Arts curse. Okay, this is a funny one that doesn't even get a name, which is interesting to begin with, but it's this whole idea that Voldemort comes to the school, visits Dumbledore, and leaves not getting a job, among other things, and ostensibly has cursed the Defense Against the Dark Arts job for several decades, I think. It is basically an entire category of magic that's never explained again and is completely separate from just about everything else in this universe. To begin with, every spell that we pretty much see in this story has to have some sort of words channeling it. Even the stuff that you do without speaking, you're still, to my understanding, thinking the words of the spell that you're casting as a way to sort of focus the type of magic you're doing. So when Voldemort just casts a kind of vague catch-all curse against an occupation, I think it opens up a lot of problems in the story. None of the Defense Against the Dark Arts teachers last more than a year. That's sort of the outcome of the curse. Some of them just get retired, some of them die, some of them get outed as werewolves, but whatever the cause is, none of them last more than a year. And we kind of treat it as a bit of a running goof, but I think if you really think about what the curse is doing, it's a little bit insane. If you think about what it does, right? Like, A, it has to know who's currently holding that position. It has to target that specific person. It has to sort of automatically retarget that person when the job changes hands. And it has to keep running indefinitely with no sort of caster maintaining it from a close proximity or anything like that. And the punishment for each teacher kind of has to change every time and adapt based on who they are and what secrets they have and, you know, what they're doing. It's such a flexible, vague spell that also seems to work year over year. And we've never seen anything else like it in the history of the universe there. And I think it's kind of interesting because most of the magic, whether or not it says it outright in the series, most of the magic in Harry Potter requires the caster to sort of maintain concentration. If you put it in sort of like D&D terminology. For instance, Harry, I think in Deathly Hallows Battle of Seven Potters, he like levitates the cart that he's in, but he gets hit with a spell or he's dodging something, he loses concentration, the cart starts to fall again. Like, the spells require concentration to be maintained in order for them to work. So when you think about it, just sort of vague curse on a role within a school that clearly he's not anywhere near for, and he's like half dead for half of it, somehow it's able to maintain its power through this entire saga. I mean, I suppose there's like a very, very slim chance that it's never mentioned, but maybe Voldemort has to like pay some sort of mana cost over time to support this spell, but obviously there's nothing of that sort ever mentioned for any other spell throughout the book. Magic doesn't even seem to cost the caster anything to cast any of it. Maybe a tangent, but like an open question. I'm assuming Voldemort knows that he cast this spell or curse right? Is it maybe possible that it's some sort of like wild magic that he did unintentionally? Because he cast this and then not too long after decides to take a position on the back of the head of a Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. Like, does he think, or does he know that his own curse is going to affect him in this way? Like, does he know that his whole plan is doomed from the start? Or am I reading into things too much here? I don't really know. All I know is that the danger here is not that the curse is placed on Quirrell or Lockhart or anything like that. It's placed on the concept of a job position at a school. And so what that does is opens the question of what else can you curse? I mean, you can curse a job. Why couldn't you curse a different job? Minister of Magic comes to mind as a job that someone might want to curse, especially if you have a whole country full of people that maybe don't like the current political leader. I would think that plenty of people in the real world are on TikTok paying witches to cast curses on people in the real world. So it would definitely happen in the made-up world. Other things, like just concepts of like whoever holds the Elder Wand, could you just curse that? You've now sort of put a death sentence on the most powerful wand. Maybe that's what exists on the Elder Wand as a concept in itself, and it drives people to compete in this way, and we just don't ever hear this curse described in a tangible way. Could you curse people that hold certain pieces of information or knowledge? I mean, it's kind of like a dark version of a Fidelius curse, where like maybe Voldemort curses the people that know where his Horcruxes are, and they're doomed to be hit by a bus or a trolley or whatever you call it over there. Like, what is the limit? That's so much of what this video is what is the limit? I think it's somewhat of a microcosm of this entire universe, that Voldemort has invented an entire new category of magic here, and he uses it for essentially petty revenge against Dumbledore. Dumbledore, I do think, is a little bit complicit in this. He has known about this curse for decades, apparently, and just continued to put new professors in there without ever trying to do anything about the curse. There's an entire job that is described as being a curse breaker. Bill Weasley is a curse breaker professionally, and admittedly, maybe that's like more of a Indiana Jones ransacking a pyramid type of curse breaking, but certainly he would have friends or like other curse breakers that Dumbledore could hire on a W-2 contractor basis to kind of break the curse or something like that. Either way, I don't know. Dumbledore just continues to put his friends and enemies alike into a role that he knows will have a downside at the end of a year. I think all in, I have to give this type of magic, this concept of magic, a score that reflects exactly that, what it is. It's a magic that affects ideas and concepts. And I think it opens the door in the same way that some of the other entries on this list have opened doors to ridiculous escalations of magic use. I think this reflects that as well. So I'm going to give this category of magic a 4 out of 5. It's not just a single curse on a single professor. It's a curse on a category of things. And I think the potential to use this for devastating consequences would just be too low-hanging fruit for villains in this world to not take advantage of it. And I've said it once, and I guess I'll say it again. We don't see any of that because no one is creative with their magic use in this world, but it doesn't mean you can't have it. And if only we had a sort of extended universe that explored some of this. I mean, imagine a sort of young protege of Harry Potter grappling with this idea, and you could call it like Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. Okay, anyway, 4 or 5. Next. Animation charm. I think I've talked about sort of transfiguration before, and I think this is in a similar boat, except whereas the transfiguration charm is like a rowboat, the animation charm is like aircraft carrier coming towards the moral ambiguity and implications of what they do in the Harry Potter world. I've got a few examples to build off of, from the mundane to maybe the more extreme. And, you know, it's not a single spell. It's not like a single example. There's a range of what's done here in the category, and it's kind of a spectrum. It starts very simple with things like Molly's kitchen knives. It's like an early introduction to the wizarding world. I think we see it really early on in the movies, and maybe we don't see it specifically until a few books in, like Goblet of Fire, where we see Molly animating things like kitchen knives to do mundane tasks. And I think that's like a large portion of what this spell and type of magic is used for. It's for automating simple household chores. I can't wait till we all get Optimus bots in our house. I hope they're not as dangerous as autopilot. And I mean, all these things are pretty mundane. Nobody really bats an eye at dishcloths washing dishes, because why would they? It's not a big deal. If you take a step further and you jump to something like in Philosopher's Stone, you're down going after the stone and you run across these animated chess pieces that McGonagall has set in place. These things I think might be a little bit different because they're strategizing, they sacrifice themselves to play the game, they have some sort of free will to make a decision and react to the game as it's played out in front of them. I don't think that McGonagall uploaded Stockfish into her spell and put it into these statues as they started playing the game, but they must have some ability to reason and play the game. This is probably also, by the way, like my 10th mention of Stockfish in a Harry Potter video, so shout out Gotham Chess, I guess. Anyway, we go from like kitchen knives to giant statues playing a logical game that requires thinking and strategy, and that's clearly an escalation. But then if you go like one step further and you look at Order of the Phoenix, you have the final scene where Dumbledore is battling Voldemort, and he's protecting Harry at the same time, and he brings this statue to life that goes into like defensive mode, pins Bellatrix down, I think, and like gets in the way of the Avada Kedavra spell that's gonna hit Harry, and like is making battle time decisions about how to react to things. It's like doing so much more than the chess pieces are. This honestly like reminds me of the TikTok of the guy that's like, this is you getting kidnapped. Oh no, please not me. And then he's like, and this is me getting kidnapped. Only 10 against 1? That's not a fair fight for you at all. Oh, punch, flip him over the back, take him outside, shoot him in the head. Like, I can't do what he does, but roundhouse kick 3 at the same time. That's what Dumbledore's statue is doing, if you lost track of the reference here. I guess what the distinction here is that McGonagall's pieces are doing some kind of like pre-programmed logic in a game setting, and Dumbledore's are like coming to life and making logical decisions in real time based on the will of Dumbledore. Which I think brings up the question of like, what is the line? It's a big statue making battlefield decisions, but where's the line between an animated object and a created being? Does this reach a point where you need to start giving rights to animated objects? I mean, it's not like Harry Potter doesn't have a confusing and concerning history with slavery or like underclass citizens or anything like that. Certainly not. I mean, this book obviously doesn't go anywhere near this topic, of course. They barely treat elves like human beings or sentient beings anyway, so there's zero chance they're going to grant suffrage to the Ford Anglia that the Weasleys drive, which leaves it to us to speculate. I have been thinking mainly about objects that are clearly animated to do a single task. They chop onions, they play chess, they battle against a horde of your students' racist parents. But what about the ones that are like a little less prescriptive and jobs that require a little bit more free will, you might call it? Enter the Sorting Hat. I mean, I'm not honestly sure where this one should land. There are times where it is just a hat. I mean, when Harry pulls a sword out of it in Chamber of Secrets, it's just a hat. But there are other times where Harry like runs into it on its own, not during the start of the year ceremony, where it's fully animated and able to just chat with him like it's just doing its day-to-day business. So it's obviously a step above something like an animated statue, but how much more complex and animated is it? I mean, it's got the infused knowledge of the founders in it, and somehow they've also cut out some of the, genocidal tendencies of one of them somehow. Or maybe not. Maybe it still keeps track of that stuff, and that's why it puts all the kids in Slytherin. I don't know. We're not going to talk about that today. All of this sort of makes me wonder about the purpose of labor, I guess, in this universe. I mean, you have the ability to create infinite free labor, and yet you still continue to use house elves, you still continue to have poor people in your society. So it brings me into this like weird realm of like, what are they even doing, and does any of it make sense whatsoever? But I'm gonna kind of brush past that for now because I have one more stretch idea to bring up here, and that's me wondering what kind of branch of magic this truly even belongs to in the first place. The obvious answer is some realm of transfiguration, but what if you compared it to another thing that did some controlling? That has led me to the speculation that perhaps the animation charm and the way that it's used in the book is somehow a branch off of, or the foundational branch of, something like the Imperius Curse, a curse that controls and animates someone and forces them to do a thing that you want. It makes me wonder, in the same way that something like Reparo is not meant to be used on living beings, if this animation spell is not meant to be used on living beings, and somehow through trial and error or something, the Imperius Curse is what comes out of a modified animation spell. I mean, I am going off into like wild uncharted territory here, but I don't know. It doesn't seem that far-fetched to me. Because I mean, you are giving some level of sentience to these inanimate objects, and I don't think it's like that huge of a stone's throw away to say that it's somehow related to the Imperius Curse. And I mean, there's some weird implications of that, because it would mean that, you know, McGonagall's basically instructing kids how to do the foundations of an unforgivable spell in their first few years, but I don't know. Honestly, I know this is all like theory crafting to the extreme, but it has me thinking about some sort of like unified theory of magic within this universe, and I don't know, I'd be curious to see what you all think about that, or if that is like, this is the kind of magic that doesn't have any unifying theory to it in any way. But it feels more satisfying when it does, I guess, is what I would say. I'm going to give animation magic a 4 out of 5. I think it's not going to cleave the world in two by any means, but I do think it's going to introduce it should introduce some pretty ethically dubious conversations and questions for Harry Potter and his trio of friends. Not to mention that it completely undermines the idea of even having a job in this world in the universe, or what their economy is even based on, but we're not going to go to that level of detail here, and I'm just gonna leave it at a 4 out of 5. Wild magic. Wild magic is a bit of a catch-all, but I thought it was interesting to include because it's basically a history of a bunch of children performing flawless magic without wands, without Latin words to focus it, and it's all just done perfectly. And I think it raises some really interesting questions about how the magic even works in this universe. So talk about some sort of unifying theory. I think this is kind of an interesting component of it. I'm not talking about how wands work or anything like that. I'm interested in how the magic itself works. And I think what's interesting, you can take it with a grain of salt if you want, there's a number of examples of this that happen within the first couple chapters of Philosopher's Stone. So there is the perspective you could have that these were all written well before the rest of the universe was really fleshed out, and so you can't take them all that seriously, and maybe they really shouldn't be that canon, but they're in the first book, so I'm going to treat them that way. First, one of the actual first instances we see of magic, at least as cast from Harry, is that he has his head shaved because his Petunia doesn't like his hair or something like that, and his hair grows back overnight. It's like a level of shape-shifting / like regeneration that we don't really ever see in the same way anywhere else within the series, and he does it wandlessly and wordlessly in his sleep. I mean, the wizarding world has entire spells and hospital wings devoted to probably regrowing limbs and, attaching things back together and stuff, and yet Harry can do it in his sleep. I think after the fact, J.K. Rowling also said that Harry's family is independently wealthy because his grandpa invented like a hair growing potion or something. So I don't know if this is like a weird throwback to that or something. I don't know. I just think it's a weird little tie-in that I'm not sure if it was on purpose or not. It probably was. Second example is, this is all Harry describing like weird things that happen around him before we know that he's a wizard, right? He is on the school roof escaping Dudley and his friends or whatever. He's running from them and he just appears on the roof suddenly, which is an example, I believe, of apparition that he's done wandlessly and wordlessly before he even knows that it's possible. I mean, there are entire like ministry protocols for reversing the damage done by people apparating incorrectly. And he just does it as like a 9-year-old or something, first try. And then one final example, again with Harry, happens at the zoo. It's like probably the first example you would come to think of, which is him vanishing the glass and Dudley falling into the snake pit. He doesn't shatter the glass, he vanishes it. So we spent several minutes early on talking about Evanesco and the fact that it's banishing something into the other world, into other planes of nothingness. And Harry does this as a 10-year-old. Now, granted, Harry as a 15-year-old isn't able to do it to a snail, and so maybe a glass window is less complex than a snail, but I think the point still stands. He does it as a small child with, no difficulty whatsoever. The one last one he does also is with his Aunt Marge, where he like inflates her into a balloon and she flies away into the sky. That's also done wandlessly, and he does it because he's mad about her besmirching his father's good name. I was rereading that section, and what it says is that the accidental magic reversal squad had to come deflate her, and the book, I think, uses the word puncture, which is maybe a joke, but at the same time, seems like a very physical solution to a magical problem. You think they'd have a spell that would deflate her, and they wouldn't have to, like, poke her with a pin, but I'm not on that squad, so what do I know, I guess? Overall, the wild magic that Harry's able to perform is like at or above his capabilities as I think even as like a 17-year-old graduate of Hogwarts. I think it's also worth mentioning that this category, this wild magic thing, also seems to be the sort of diagnostic test for whether or not your child is magical to begin with. We are told about the ways that Neville is tested to see if he's magical when he's a child, and there's a few that they threw him out a window. I think that's how they found out that he was magical. Someone, his uncle or something, pushed him out of a window and he bounced down the street instead of, dying. It is a weirdly parallel to like Bran's awakening in Game of Thrones. He gets pushed out of a window too. So I bet that's a reference you didn't see coming. I'm pretty sure that happens in Philosopher's Stone, so it's probably still being written as sort of a children's novel there, but I wouldn't be surprised if that is the method for testing if your child has magic. Whether or not it's in the first book or the 7th book, I bet that probably holds true to some degree. And I think the thing that has tied some of this together, at least in the first few examples that I've given, is that it's been pretty unintentional and sort of random and unaimed. And, if that were the case all the time, I think it wouldn't be that bad. Except that we have a counterexample in Tom Riddle, who is sort of intentionally using this wild, wandless, wordless magic to do damage pretty early on. He says to Dumbledore, I can make things move without touching them. I can make animals do what I want. I can make bad things happen to people who annoy me. And obviously, Tom Riddle's like a generational talent, so there's, he's going to be able to do things that normal magical people can't, but it still is on the spectrum of what's possible. So there's like this level that I think wild magic might be able to do things that even adults with wands can't. And Tom Riddle is proof that it doesn't have to be random. He is able to aim it and do exactly what he wants. And the only sort of safety release valve here is the sort of temperament of the child, and hopefully he's got parents. But like otherwise, if it's a bad enough child and a talented enough child, they can pretty much do whatever they want. And good thing children are never temperamental. That certainly wouldn't be an issue ever, would it? Honestly, I think I wanted to give this a higher score, and it's all kind of supported by the Newt Scamander spin-off, like obscurial things and whatever, but where I think like the magic is suppressed and then it like bursts out and causes calamities or whatever they call it. I don't know. I don't know too much about those, and I don't really care to talk about them all that much, so I am going to give this wild magic category a 3 out of 5. It's clearly dangerous, it could clearly be used maliciously, but I think the limit that controls this is that people seem to lose their connection to this ability the more that they grow. And Voldemort, for example, uses a wand despite not needing one as a child to do similarly terrible things. So clearly there's a point where it stops becoming useful, and maybe that's just a natural aging out of being able to use it, but either way, I think it puts a natural limiter on this, and so for that reason, I'll give it a 3 out of 5. Lumos. Lumos is a spell that shows up in just about every version of Harry Potter media that exists, so I thought I would explore that a little bit, because it shows up a little bit differently every single time. In the books, Lumos is pretty self-explanatory and simple. It is a little light that appears on the tip of someone's wand. That's pretty much it. It glows, it lights things up, like, problem solved. We see Harry using it throughout the series to differing degrees of success. Interestingly, in, I think, Prisoner of Azkaban, maybe, it opens with him testing out Lumos, which we will get to in a moment. But either way, it's a pretty simple spell. It's used, I think, instinctually, at least that's what the word the book uses in book 5, when Dudley and him are being attacked by Dementors. He uses Lumos instinctually to find his wand again. But interestingly, he's never really punished for using Lumos. And I don't know if that's because in J.K. Rowling's worldview, it's the equivalent of lighting a candle, and so it doesn't matter, it's barely counted as magic, or it's possible also that the Patronus that he cast is sort of superseding the use of Lumos, and, it's not worth even talking about Lumos when you cast the Patronus instead, and so maybe it's just brushed over for that reason. But either way, Lumos in the book is just that. It's basically a little LED. That's it. But I have a couple ideas that I want to walk through about Lumos, some of them even from the comments that I asked for. So the first one I wanted to talk about was a bit of a sort of spell maintenance question, I guess you might call it, which is nobody is talking about whether or not you can hold Lumos on as you are casting other magic. The book never really talks about it, especially not in the context explicitly of Lumos, but it seems to be every time you cast a spell, your wand is occupied with that spell. It's kind of similar to the concentration conversation. You have to concentrate on that spell. Your wand can't do other things while you're using it to cast a different spell. I mean, I don't remember any times of people casting multiple spells simultaneously, but maybe you do. So imagine the scenario, you're in a dark corridor, you need a light, you cast Lumos, and now you can't do anything to defend yourself because you're stuck holding your little magical torch the whole time. And so you go from this spell that's like a small quality of life improvement to something that's like actually a liability in a more dangerous situation because you're occupied holding your wand up in the air rather than casting Protego or whatever you need to defend, which lands you in this weird circumstance where wearing a headlamp is more effective and useful than using a magical spell like Lumos, unless you're dual wielding akimbo style Halo 2 Combat Evolved, like Lumos in one hand, firing off spells in the other hand, which would be cool, and I think they should do that, but I don't think they do that anywhere in the books. Harry does cast a spell out of 3 wands at the same time once, so it feels like you should be able to hold 2 wands and to do 2 different spells, logically. Although dual wielding opens up a whole nother can of worms that we're not going to talk about right now. That said, the counter argument I have is that there is a counter spell called Nox, which is used to put lights out, which may imply that Lumos is something that continues on and has to be extinguished rather than something that has to be held active through concentration alone. But it's a little bit of a stretch, I think. And really, I think the heart of this comment that was asking about can you use it as a buff, basically, is really extending beyond just Lumos. And is there any other worlds and spells that are buff related that you should be able to cast in this universe. And I was about to sort of dismiss it a little bit, but then there is one instance that comes to mind, and it's in the epilogue of the story. So what good it's worth, I don't know, but Ron mentions having to take a driver's test in the epilogue and mentions that he uses like a super sensory charm to just make himself better. It's just like this weird generic Spidey sense spell that like, why have you not been using this the whole time through all the trials and tribulation of the last 7 years if you can just cast a spell that makes you more physically able whenever you want? That said, like, that's a charm that you cast and it has an effect that continues on, which I think is a little different than the intention, which would be like you're casting Lumos and also casting Expelliarmus at the same time. I don't know. It just seems like maybe the jury's out, but it seems like it would be a incredibly useless spell if you're not able to do anything else while you're casting Lumos. This question, though, has led me to sort of a different part of the conversation for Lumos that I wanted to talk about, which is kind of the, I don't know, form factor, the aesthetics of it. It's just kind of interesting that the light is like stuck to the end of the wand tip. It seems like an aesthetic choice that J.K. Rowling made, because I feel like in a practical sense, it should be a light that just sort of floats above the caster like it would in Oblivion or Skyrim or something like that, not something that's fixed to the wand tip, because that's not, like, the wand isn't used as an object in other instances. It's just the place that the magic comes out of. Like, it's just sort of used as the tool. I don't know if anyone's understanding what I'm saying here. Maybe I'm splitting hairs a little bit. I guess what I'm saying is that you should be able to cast Lumos on your fingertip and have your finger glow, or, you know, on a different object that you're carrying around, so that you can still use your wand to cast spells. And to the point of the comment that brought this up, a candle held in your offhand is like infinitely more useful than a non-functional wand. The entirety of Hogwarts is lit by candles. You could just grab one and carry it around, and then you're free to duel to your heart's content, instead of, you know, carrying a flashlight around and getting yourself blown to bits by some Death Eaters or something because you can't cast a spell. All of it leads to Lumos being basically less effective than some lit wax, which ultimately brings me to my final point, which is like the reason that I kind of brought this up in the first place, which is that Lumos is very inconsistently represented in different mediums. There's movies and books and games, and all of them show Lumos a little bit differently. I mean, even the books have different ways of treating Lumos. In the first book, Hermione casts Lumos Solem with the purpose of defeating the Devil's Snare, because it's like Lumos that's sunlight versus non-sunlight Lumos, whatever that means. I mean, there's like different adaptations in the movies, there's different adaptations in the books. I don't know what Lumos Solem does. It just like changes the light temperature, because the Devil's Snare can tell the difference between cool light and warm light. It's like the wizarding equivalent of buying different bulbs at Home Depot or something. It's just like weirdly specific. The movie version of Prisoner of Azkaban added Lumos Maxima, and Harry is practicing this in the Dursleys' house over summer break, but never gets caught by the Ministry of Magic or the Trace or anything like that. And I think that whole scene was invented just to have a flashy title card that started the movie. The video games also added different tiers, like Lumos Duo, which was like, I think, some sort of light beam functionality or like laser beam functionality or something. I don't know. They just sort of added stuff in because they wanted to, or because they needed different ranks for you to unlock or something. Point being, just the one version wasn't enough ever. And I don't need to get too far into that. Maybe there's a video to talk about all the different games at some point in the future, but I'll save that for the future. Anyways, I think I need to realistically give Lumos a 1 out of 5. It's like the least overpowered spell that exists in this world. That might be the reason why every different medium invented more powerful versions than the last, just to make it something worth spending a few seconds of airtime on. So I think this one is a pretty clear, and maybe the first clear version of a 1 out of 5 spell in this video. Done, dusted, on to the next one. Patronus. The Patronus spell, I think, may be one of the most wasted spells in the series. I think it's something that just is completely underutilized and not really talked about. There is this component of the Patronus spell that never really gets talked about. It's obviously this very specific thing for warding off Dementors and yada yada, but there's this piece that gets introduced and isn't like, I don't know how often they specifically talk about it, but Patronuses can be used to transport messages back and forth. And I guess there are a few scenes where, like, I think it's Arthur Weasley's Patronus is like an otter or a muskrat or something, and he stands up and like speaks in Arthur Weasley's voice. So they do talk about it, they do show it on the page, but it's not something that gets like a deep dive. And then there's also times where J.K. Rowling is like talking about how she hinted about it earlier on in a few books prior. I think the example here is in Goblet of Fire. Dumbledore sends his Patronus somewhere to go deliver a message, and it's only kind of shown as like Dumbledore shot a silver bolt of light somewhere. Either way, there's this messaging component of the Patronus that isn't explored all that much. And yet, we have instances where messages are being monitored, and yet nobody really seems to utilize this Patronus skill when it's like right at their fingertips. I mean, the majority of Order of the Phoenix is like talking about every method of communication being monitored. And really from that point on, it's why they even use the Patronuses in the first place, but why we never see Harry or Hermione or Ron using it to communicate, I don't know, even though it's right in front of them. Or Sirius, for that matter, sending a Patronus. That's a good question. I don't know if Sirius is capable of Patronus anymore, but regardless, he doesn't use one. Setting aside the sort of messaging component of the Patronus spell, there's a few other sort of absurd things that I want to talk about here. First and foremost, the sort of form factor of the Patronus. This is like similar to the Animagus conversation. Harry's Patronus is a stag. It seems it's not something you choose. It's like based on your personality traits and all that stuff. But I do wonder if the actual form of the Patronus has an effect on how useful it is. Like Harry's is a stag and it runs very quickly and it can dash at the Dementors and et cetera, et cetera. But like, what if your like inner self is a tortoise? Like, what if your Patronus is a Magikarp? Like, does it just sort of flop around in front of a Dementor? Like, does the Dementor care about it? Does it just like, do you just watch it flop? Do you have to like nudge it towards the Dementor with your foot to keep the Dementor away? I mean, at what point does the Dementor just kind of like walk around your Patronus because it's not a super effective one? I know this is a joke, but it's not entirely hypothetical, at least in the wizarding universe, because there's one source that I can't remember off the top of my head that talks about the caster's Patronus being an elephant, I think. No, or the size of a giant. Maybe it was a giant. Either way, like, is a bigger Patronus stronger? Is it able to dispatch more Dementors at once? I gotta look this up, because doesn't McGonagall cast like 3 Patronuses at once? Just before they meet Snape in the halls, McGonagall sends out 3 cat Patronuses. Patroni? LOL. I mean, it opens a very genuine question of like, is there a purpose to casting more? Or is the manifestation of the Patronus just a sort of like placeholder? Does it not really matter that you have the animal form, the corporeal form bouncing around? Is it more just like a area of effect spell and the animal's just a side effect of that? That would make the most sense to me, but like, I don't know. There seems to be some sort of tangible component of the Patronus that has some sort of effect. Now, the other piece of the Patronus that I was going to talk about was the sort of actual primary function of it, which is to scare away Dementors. And it's oddly specific spell that like doesn't seem to have a whole bunch of other uses, which maybe is why J.K. Rowling invented this messaging component to it. But I think in defense of that, I was thinking about the fact that like it's probably taught to younger students because they don't have great means of escaping a Dementor if they were to come up against one in the wild or something like that. Adults could apparate away, or they have different ways of sort of handling a situation like that than a child might. So it actually does kind of make sense to me that this is like school curriculum, that this is a spell that you're learning. It's kind of the same as getting your driver's license, I think. It's like, as an adult, you're like, driving is easy, but, as a child, it's something that you need to learn, a skill you need to learn. So I understand that it functions kind of like training wheels for dealing with these situations for children. So I think in a defense of the spell, it does kind of make sense that the purpose of it is so niche, and they almost didn't need to add in this messaging component to begin with, but that's neither here nor there. And one final thing that's going to get a little, philosophical for a moment, if you'll bear with me, is what I would call maybe the Brandon Sanderson angle here. A Patronus is a projection of positive emotion. It's a physical manifestation of like happiness and love and hope and whatever comes to mind for the caster. If you follow the Brandon Sanderson school of magic design, every bit of magic has sort of this like yin and yang component to it, this push and pull. And so if a Patronus is made of a positive energy, is there potentially like an anti-Patronus, a Patronus of negative energy? And one speculation that I had there is that perhaps, in a way, what Avada Kedavra is. It's real sort of hatred and malice. You have to mean it. You can't just sort of cast it by reading the words off a book. There's this emotional component to it. I know it's a stretch, but I just wonder if there's like an interesting connection here between the soul and Dementors and Patronuses and Avada Kedavra. It's all kind of swirling around in the same realm to me. And so maybe the Killing Curse is a dark Patronus that sort of shepherds people into the afterlife. I mean, the alternative is that, like, what if there actually is just a dark Patronus and it's like a really goth-looking stag that runs around and brings Dementors to you? Or maybe Dementors could themselves be the anti-Patronus, I guess. Maybe you could, in theory, create one. I think that is kind of the wiki definition of where they're created, like in swamps and bogs and like places of despair. So maybe it kind of is that Dementors are the anti-Patronus, but I don't know. You tell me. I think like it's such a niche and specific spell, and so even the most extreme uses of it are so non-extreme that I just have to land on a 1 out of 5 for the Patronus spell. I'm not feeling like there's any real risk of anything happening here. So, I think pretty cleanly another 1 out of 5, unless of course it's like the opposite of the Killing Curse. And then I don't know, that's a whole different conversation. But for now, I think 1 out of 5. Flipendo. I'm closing with a spell that I could have sworn was in the books, and the fact that it isn't is maybe all that much more interesting to me. Flipendo is, from my understanding, I think a spell that only exists in the video games. It was not something that was in the books, although there is reference to a sort of knockback jinx or spell that people use in different situations that might not ever be named in the book, and so it might be Flipendo. I mean, if you remember playing these games as a kid, it was, I believe, maybe that's where my memory is going, and it was like one of your like primary spells that you would cast like offensively while you were roaming around. It's been a while, so I don't know. Remind me in the comments if I'm on point here, but I think that's maybe where it's coming from. And so it's this, I don't know, deep embedded memory in my skull about early magic use, I suppose. I had, I think, the Xbox version of the Chamber of Secrets game, and I hated it. There was specifically stealth components to the game that absolutely were my least favorite video game I ever played. I stopped playing the game about halfway through because I had to sneak through some library or something, and I don't remember why, but I absolutely hated it. I think what was an interesting part of Flipendo as I was looking at it is that it started to have this repeating pattern where there's a bunch of spells in the movies and the games that have extra versions of them. You have Flipendo, I think has a Maxima version of it. You have Bombarda, Maxima, you have Lumos and Lubos Maxima. Like Umbridge casts Bombarda Maxima in the movies, but I don't think that's in the books. And you just have all these inventions that sort of get added after the fact, while the book has almost none of that. The interesting part of this conversation, I think, is that because all of these cultural touch points have sort of baked together over time, it's sort of made this amalgamation of magic in this world that is hard to separate at this point. The books, though, don't have these Maxima versions that I think sort of water down the effects of the magic to begin with. You don't get like an Accio Maxima. You don't get Patronus Maxima. But, you know, the books or the games and the movies have to give you upgrade paths to do extra stuff as you level up. And so all of that just mixes together in a way that makes it really, really muddy, honestly. Not to mention the fact that there's so much fan fiction out there for Harry Potter that, like, if you Google anything, it's like a 50-50 chance that you're just going to find a bunch of fan fiction Stack Exchange articles or something, and that just gets super confusing real quick and real adult. I think all in, it's an interesting conversation because it turns the Harry Potter canon into this, honestly, a little bit more of a collaborative effort across everything that's contributing to it in a way that's probably not too dissimilar from Star Wars. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on the Star Wars universe, but like there are all those like series and sub-series and like books and things made from outside the main George Lucas era that are considered canon, I think. Or maybe there's like an argument about it being like pre or post Disney, I think, or whatever. You could fill me in there if you want. But like, point being, I don't really care about J.K. Rowling. I think that I believe more so in the sort of death of an author, and that the series takes on its own life after that with the people that consume it. And so I think this is an interesting case where as you have things like Hogwarts Legacy and new movies and books and spin-offs and stuff, I think all that starts to kind of mix into the canon, and it's not what I would use for like these genuine ranking videos and things like that, but I think it expands the world in an interesting way, and I think it's a page out of the Star Wars universe that is worth taking, if I'm honest. So this was a section that was supposed to be about a spell that doesn't exist in the books. Maybe it does, and maybe at its worst, I think Snape casts it on Harry and knocks him back 10 feet or something. So, you know, maybe 5 out of 5 on the philosophical perspective here, but in terms of the actual spell itself, I think it's a 1 out of 5. It's a little bit of a push, maybe a big push, but it's a 1 out of 5. Okay, so to recap, we have covered erasing matter from existence, bags that break the idea of physical space, quantum entanglement, matter and energy manipulation, like artificial intelligence and sentience, and so many other things today. So I'm not sure where you would rank each of these things on a list, but I've done my best here, and you can let me know what you think about where I've placed things. Honestly, these absurdist videos are some of my favorite to do because they just kind of take things to the extreme, and I know it's not always realistic, but, you know, I enjoy doing them, so hopefully you enjoy watching them. If you have ideas for a part 3 of this video, I probably will do another one at some point. At some point, I'm going to run out of spells to use, but I have a few more to go, I think, before I do. There are plenty of other videos on the channel if you want to check something out. There's obviously the sort of part 1 version of this video that's one of the most popular on this channel. There's videos about the economy in Harry Potter, and I'm working on all kinds of other stuff, so stay tuned for more. I also have YouTube memberships available on the channel if you want to support me directly. There's a Patreon that you can use to support me directly that gets you access to the videos ad-free and a little bit early. You can also now watch these videos on Spotify. If you want to listen to them as a sort of podcast format, you can do that as well. There's so many different ways to consume the content, so just let me know what you're liking, and I promise there'll be more of it. On your way out, don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, do all that normal YouTube stuff, and I'll be sure to respond to as many as I can. But I think that's it for me, so thanks again for watching. I'll see you next time.